Gonna go over the actual questions now. Just to recap what we did the other day or earlier today. Um, we used Unravel. We made an Unravel poster or anchor chart. It's not the best, but we underline the title, predict the passage, run through and over the paragraphs. Are we reading, annotating the questions? Are we reading the answer choices? And venture through, read, and annotate the passage. So we did do all of these. The only thing we did not do is annotate the passage. So I'm going to go back through and read it again and annotate the passage. And then we'll start eliminating the wrong answers. Keep in mind, I don't know how to say some of these words. So be mindful of it. So if you don't have a highlighter, which is what I'm trying to find, what I did with mine, you can use a pencil or whatever the case may be. So we'll just start at the very top. And one other thing that I want to tell y'all that is really cool to do is when you are writing on using the Unravel strategy, if you write it on top of your paper like this, and then as you do each step to exit out. So we underline the title, so I can go here and mark that out. We numbered the paragraph. We predicted the passage. We ran through and numbered the paragraphs. Are we reading and annotating the questions? We read the questions, and I told you the only mark that we put is main idea, means what it is mostly about. We put that there. Remember that part A and part B go together, and we highlighted the most important part. Oh, this other part, we talked about this being the text structure. Because remember I said that on the leap, it'll say how is the text structured or what is the organizational structure. So we did both of those steps. We did venture through and read it, but we're going to read it and annotate it one more time. Reminding you, I don't know how to pronounce all the words and say it correctly. I am a human, so sorry. In 1838, the the Potawatomi Indians were forced to leave their homelands and move far away. The text tells the story of one girl during a terrible event. As you read, take notes on the challenges that Equiseki faces. So, one thing that I want to make sure that we say, we talked about this hundreds of times at school. We do not call Indians Indians. We call them Native Americans. This is not the proper way to say that, but let's go through and read it. In 1838, the Potawatomi Indians were forced to leave their homes and move west. Remember that we talked about this in social studies. This is part of the westward expansion. They're all moving to the west, and it's called the Trail of Tears. Equiseki tried to calm her fears as the soldiers stood in the clearing, ordering her family to leave their home. Even though she was a child, she was about to begin the longest walk of her life, a journey of more than 600 miles. So, thinking back to our prediction about a long journey, it is a long journey. Why was this happening? Thousands of settlers from the east were beginning to move farther west, and they wanted land. So, here, I would do this if this was me. Thousands of settlers moved east. President Andrew Jackson had just approved the Indian Removal Act, which called for resettling Native Americans on land west of the Mississippi. Over the next several years, many tribes, including Potawatomi, were forced to leave their homelands. So they had to leave because of this act right here, the Indian Removal Act, where they had to leave. On the hot September day in 1838, soldiers came to the beautiful Nile Valley in Michigan, where Equiseki lived with her mother, father, sister, and other tribal members. The soldiers gave them 15 minutes to collect what they could carry on their backs and leave. Equiseki and her family were sad and frightened. They were told they didn't hurry, their village would be burned. So, what is something there in that passage that would be something that stands out to you? To me, something that would stand out is that the soldiers gave them 15 minutes to collect what they could carry on their backs and leave. It said that they were scared and frightened. I would also highlight they were told that if they didn't hurry, their village would be burned. Some of the soldiers felt bad about what was being done to the Powhatan, but others pushed the people along with the butts of their rifles. And so a rifle, if you look at the back, it says a 1. They'll have stuff like that on leap test too, and it tells you it's a gun. By the second night of their journey, Equiseki was more tired than she had ever been before. So basically in this one, if they didn't, hurry up and walk, that they would push them and with the end of their guns. The soldiers stopped at a place called Mud Creek. Equiseki missed the Great Lake her family had lived by in Michigan. For hundreds of years, her family had fished for trout in the lake and in the nearby St. Joseph River. So just something that I would find interesting or, important was that they were used to fishing for trout in the St. Joseph River. So it makes sure that it says that the soldiers stopped at a place called Mud Creek, and this is what made her reflect on missing that part of the St. Joseph River. But here there was no sound of running water. Mud Creek was only a trickle, barely enough to quench her thirst. So they couldn't really. There wasn't running water. It wasn't like we can go to a faucet and sit down and drink whatever. Mud Creek was only a trickle, so a trickle is just a little bit. It's enough to quench your thirst and to keep on moving, which is what they wanted you to do. The soldiers divided the Potawatomi into small groups and gave each portion a cornmeal. Equiseki's mother stirred this into boiling water to make some kind of mush for dinner. Equiseki was so tired she could barely eat. So, again, when you highlight, you don't have to highlight everything, but you could say that they divided them into and gave them a portion. Her mama made this into mush. That's something that I would highlight. By the next day, many children and some of the older people were too sick to walk. So next day, many of them was too sick to walk. They were put into baggage wagons and carried along. Equiseki sometimes felt ill, but she was determined not to get into the sick wagon. So this is something that I remember from my questions. Even though she felt ill, she was determined not to get into the sick wagon. The wagons were crowded, stuffy, and smelly. The cloth covered held in the heat, and she could hardly bear the sight of the jail wagon where the tribal chiefs were forced to ride. It was almost like a cage. They passed through many towns on their journey. Sometimes the townspeople were kind to them. In Rochester, Indiana, people made hoe cakes or corn pancakes for the hungry Potawatomi. Sorry, I'm going to get it by the time we finish. And in Jacksonville, Illinois, the town band played, and the mayor came out to give candy to Equiseki and other children. But as the journey continued, the drought that had dried up Mud Creek got worse. Sometimes when the soldiers stopped for the night, Equiseki could not quench her thirst at all. The only water was from stagnant ponds or muddy creeks, which even the horses refused to drink. So right here, it's telling you the word stagnant. When we don't know a word, we can box it in like that, but it has a 2 by it, so that means I can go to the bottom of my passage and it tells me that it's a body of water that is still and might smell bad. So it said even the horses refused to drink it. It wasn't enough to quench her thirst, so that's something that I would say would be important to highlight. It could not quench the thirst at all. The only water was from the muddy creeks. The horses refused to drink it, and this is because the drought dried up Mud Creek. So finally, the weather changed. One day, as she walked along, it began to pour. Equiseki held her face up to the rain, eagerly drinking fresh, cool drops of water. So this would be like a good thing because she got some fresh water. And when I find things interesting in a passage, I can sometimes like do something like this because I find it interesting. By now it was late October and the weather quickly grew. One day it snowed. Many of the people were barefoot, the moccasins worn through from the long march. It was almost a week before the soldiers could get shoes for the shivering footsore tribe. So moccasins right here, just for reference, those are the type of shoes that they wore. So it lets you know that they were barefoot, and their moccasins had worn. Think about it. They had to march all the way from their home to, according to this part that we read, it was 600 miles. That's pretty far to walk. So their shoes got torn up. It was almost a week before the soldiers could get shoes for the shivering. Shivering means cold, and that's another thing if you weren't sure, footsore tribe. So I'm gonna just put colds because that lets me know. And then my context clue for moccasins would be right here where it says shoes. That lets me know what that means. So we know that they were barefooted. Finally, on November 4th, 1838, after more than 600 miles of hard travel, Equiseki and her tribe reached Pottawatomie Creek in Kansas, but a short time later moved to their final destination, Sugar Creek. They arrived during a snowstorm. Their friends, the Osage Indians, didn't have enough shelter for them. Equiseki's family hung animal skins from the stone banks along Sugar Creek and huddled under them to stay warm. So something that will be important is that they arrived during a snowstorm and the Osage Indians didn't have enough shelter for them. So the family hung animal skins and huddled together to stay warm. Equiseki had survived the long march. That year, she and her sister went to school at Sugar Creek Mission. Equiseki now called Teresa Slavin, but she did not forget what had happened when she grew up, married, and had her own daughter. She told her about the long, sad journey of their tribe because so many people had died along the way. The Pottawatomie called it the Trail of Death. So, just some key points right here. She had to change her name right here. This is something that we talked about called assimilation, where you have to adapt to the culture of the area that you were around. So I just put that there. So she changed her name from Equiseki to Teresa Slavin. And then it also says the Trail of Death right here. This is also called, which we talk about, is the Trail of Tears, because so many people died, or that's why they use the word death. So she did end up going to school, growing up, getting married, having her own daughter, and telling her story about what happened. The story was passed from mother to child, 3 generations. Finally, a young girl named Virginia was told the story by her mother. Virginia Pearl, CSJ, a Catholic sister, is the great granddaughter of Equiseki and a member of the citizen band Potawatomi in Oklahoma. She tells Ekweseki's story whenever she has the chance. It is her hope that people will always remember that long journey so that such a sad thing will never happen again. It helps me to remember Ekweseki's courage when hard things happen to me. Sister Pearl says, may her story help you have courage when anything hard happens to you on your journey. So, something that I would just highlight is that she talks about that it's her hope. You know, the reason she's sharing the story is that it's her hope she doesn't have to, a sad thing like that never happens again. So she wanted to tell that story. And whenever you feel discouraged, she remembers Ekweseki's courage when things, get hard. She remembers that. So I would highlight that. So that's the reading passage. So we annotated it, and it's important that you make sure that you annotate things, whatever you make connections to, so that when we go into these questions, we can answer them. Sorry, my finger was in the way. So we'll start off with the first question up here, and it says, which sentence describes the main idea of the text? A. When the Potawatomi Indians were forced from their home in 1883, they were able to keep their lifestyle in their new home. So, did they get to keep their new home? Did they keep their lifestyle? If I look back, remember they had to change their name. That's assimilation. So that lets me know that A is not correct. So I can't put the X on this side. I'm going to put an X on this side because I know that A is not correct. When the Potawatomi Indians were forced from their home in 1883, they discovered a part of the country that they really loved. Nothing about this story showed love or compassion, so I'm going to put an X next to that. When the Potawatomi Indians were forced from their home in 1883, they faced terrible challenges on the long march and in their homes. So did anything, as we were reading, talk about having terrible challenges on the long march and in their new home? We did. We talked about how they didn't have, how if I look back here, it was stagnant. They didn't have water to quench their thirst. The horses wouldn't really drink it. They had to be barefooted. They had to assimilate. People died. If you flip back to the beginning, they were removing people. Also remember, she felt ill, but she refused to get on them because she didn't want to go into the sick wagon. So those are some challenges. And then, so we're not going to eliminate that. Let's look at D. When the Potawatomi Indians were forced from their home in 1883, they died from sickness and starvation before they reached their new home. That is true. This happened as well, that people died and were sick and starving. But here is where you have to look at a play on words and really pay attention to the things that the question is asking you. Which describes the main idea? What is it mostly about? Is it just about people dying from the sickness and starvation? No. So because this one talks specifically about just the sickness and starvation, I'm going to X that out, because the most important part, the whole article, the whole text talks about the terrible challenges on the long march. So my correct answer would be C. So moving on to number 2, you have to use a detail from the text that best supports the answer to part A. So because this is part A, part B and part A have to go together. Okay, so A says thousands of settlers from the east were beginning to move further west and they wanted land. That is true. But they didn't want, they wanted to stay in their own land. Other people wanted their land. So that's not exactly the case for them. Um so thousands of settlers who came from the east, this side of the map, if we think about a United States maps, people over here were moving this way to where they were. So what they wanted when they moved there was their land. So that is not something that, I mean, it is a challenge, but it's not directly affecting a terrible challenge on a long march. So going back to this one, it's talking about terrible challenges on a long march and in their new homes. So that one doesn't directly affect it. So we will put an X on the A. So then B says the soldiers divided the Potawatomi into small groups and gave each portion a cornmeal. They did that. That's just one challenge. So let's just kind of look at the other choices before we X those out. Sometimes when the soldiers stopped for the night, Equiseki could not quench her thirst at all. The only water was the stagnant ponds or muddy creeks. Is this one of the terrible challenges that they went through on the long march? That was one of the challenges. Them giving them a portion wasn't really a challenge. So we can go back to B and cross that out. But we're not going to cross C out because even when I went back to the passage and showed you that that's one of the things I highlighted, that on their journey that the water was stagnant, they couldn't quench their thirst, even the horses wouldn't drink it. Keep in mind that it says terrible challenges on the long march. So I'm not going to X out C, so let's look at D. The story was passed on from mother to child for 3 generations. Finally, a young girl named Virginia was told the story by her mother. This is not a terrible challenge that they faced. So the obvious answer about the terrible challenge would be C. And they support each other because that's one of the things that we said. If we're looking for a terrible challenge on a long march, the only thing that talks about a terrible challenge for them on the long march would be C, and about how they couldn't quench their thirst. So why was Equiseki determined to avoid the wagons? A, she wanted to walk with her family. Is that why she didn't go on that wagon? So let's go back to where it talks about the wagon in paragraph 9, where it says how the next day many children and some of the older people were too sick to walk. They were put in the baggage wagons and carried along. Equiseki sometimes felt ill, but she was determined not to go into the sick wagon. The wagons were crowded, stuffy, and smelly. The cloth covering held in the heat, and she could hardly bear the sight of the jail wagon where the tribal chiefs were forced to ride. It was almost like a cage. So let's go back to that. It had nothing to do with the fact that she wanted to walk with her family. It had nothing to do with the fact that she wanted to feel the rain when it started, because that's not why she didn't want to get in it. And then she saw wagons that looked hot and crowded and were filled with sick people. Did they say that? They said it was crowded, smelly, and stuffy. Right here, the wagons were crowded, stuffy, and smelly. So this would be my obvious answer because they showed me that in that paragraph. She saw wagons that had space and she saved those for people who were sick. That's not why she didn't go. It explicitly told us the wagons were crowded, stuffy, and smelly. Then when we go to our questions, it says they looked hot and crowded and were filled with sick people. What effect did the move have on Equiseki? So she lost her whole family. Did she lose her whole family? It never tells us all about that. She had to eat a different kind of fish. They talked about her hunting trout. Right here where it talks about that her family had fish for trout. and in a nearby just St. Joseph River, but it doesn't tell us that she had to eat a different kind. So that's not it. She had to leave her favorite pair of shoes behind. It had nothing to do with shoes because remember they were barefooted when their moccasins, got worn from walking. She had to change many things, including her name. That would be it. So if we think about it, go back to the passage. I told you the word is called assimilation when you have to adapt to the culture. So she survived the long march. She had to go to school at Sugar Creek Mission. She was now called to slaving, but she didn't forget about all of the stuff that she had been through. So going back to that, the answer would be D. Now we're going to talk about the text structure. How does the author of the text organize the information? She presents a few stories that her great-grandmother told her. That is not, the author didn't talk about her great-grandmother herself. She presents the stories of several tribes that were forced from their homes. We're only talking about what tribe did you hear constantly? Potawatomi. So that's X is out. B. C says she presents details about one girl's experiences being forced from her home. Did we talk about more than one girl? No. What was the girl's name we talked about? Equiseki. And her experience and about how they were forced from their home in their long march. So I'm not Xing that one out. So let's look at D. She presents a debate about whether it was right to force the Native Americans to move. She never asked you your opinion or debating or trying to figure out if this was right or if it was wrong. She basically tells you about Ekwaseki's experience, about her family being forced from their home to move to another one. So that answer would be C. And that would be all of the questions for that. And we will talk about question 6 on tomorrow, which says, how does the trail of death change Ikoseki's life? So you can kind of be thinking about how that happens. And we will annotate this question and all of this on tomorrow.